Hey guys, how's it going? I thought I'd tackle another topic related to kakapo deaths this week, and that is why do young kakapo die? Kakapo appear to have a relatively high mortality rate over the first stages of their life. So first stages of their life we classify as from birth through to fledging. And during this period of time, anywhere between 10% and 30% of chicks that hatch will die. In 2016, I believe about 49 kakapo chicks hatched. 33 or 34 made it to fledging. It's not always that bad. In 2002, 26 kakapo chicks hatched, 24 made it to fledging. There's about a 10% mortality rate there. Same in 2009, we had about a 10% mortality rate. But, in 2019, about 90-odd chicks hatched and 72-ish made it to fledging. So there's a pretty high mortality rate in the first stage of life. Naturally, there would be an even greater mortality rate. Now, the interesting thing is, it doesn't stop there. Even after fledging, losses are common. In the first 3 years of life, so we classify that as about 6 months of age when a chick fledges or leaves its mother, through to 3 years of age when they are classified as adults, about 10% more chicks will die. Since the 2019 breeding season, I think something like 7 or 8 of the chicks that were born in 2019 have since died in the first 3 years of life. Now, even after that, it seems that there is another phase of mortality that happens. We talked about last week the fact that kakapo males do seem to die of fighting. Interestingly, for young females, there seems to be, we've observed increased mortality, particularly amongst young females nesting. So first 10 years of being a breeding female. So kakapo enter the breeding population at 5 years of age, although many will breed a bit later on. And we've observed that, since 2010, so last 12 years, there's been about 16 young adult kakapo, so kakapo of a known age born in the 10 to 20 years prior to that have died, and of those, roughly 2/3 are female. It's an interesting statistic. Now, it might be that the key point of difference is this aspergillosis outbreak. We lost Gemma last week, possibly Ra. We know that in 2019, 2 young females, Huhana and Hoki, both passed away from the infection. And a young female, he had the infection, was found dead later on after successfully recovering, but perhaps there were still impacts or a weakened immune system that led to her loss. It's unknown. She did too long to accurately determine the cause of death. So it could be that this fungal infection is the key cause of this anomaly. Might be another couple of factors sitting in the background in terms of overall increased stress on a young female, weakens the of raising offspring, weakens the immune system and leaves them susceptible to other things. It's not guaranteed that Ra died of aspergillosis. A typical symptom prior to death is loss of appetite and listlessness, and she appeared to be feeding right until death. This testing will ultimately determine the outcome of her death, but it's inconclusive at this stage. Given, the more research is needed. But I think the question is, well, why does this happen? So that's a remarkably high percentage of young kakapo that die. And I think it helps to understand just how inbred Kakapo are. All Kakapo except for the male Richard Henry were found on Stewart Island in the 1980s. These Kakapo are descended from a population that has been genetically isolated for 10 to 15,000 years. They probably crossed over to Stewart Island on a land bridge a long, long time ago when sea level was far lower. But what that means is there was probably only a small initial number of founders, and those founders bred heavily amongst each other, reducing the overall genetic fitness of the population. Now, interestingly, they seem to have become so inbred and probably naturally had such a high death rate as a result of that, that actually have selectively purged the worst expected causes of inbreeding out of the population. Now, it might not sound great given the fact we're losing 20% of young Kakapo or 25%, before they even produce offspring. But we have to place that in context of what you would typically expect. And many scientists would expect a complete and total collapse of the population, and because it would be deemed too unviable and too closely related to effectively function as a species. So with that in mind, us losing 10 to 30% of chicks and then 10% of young adults and then a further percentage of breeding birds in their first 10, 15 years of breeding, it is sad, but it is not the end of the species. In many ways, it's actually what we would expect. Now, what I mean by that is naturally we would expect high mortality amongst Kakapo. They've gone through a bottleneck, and while it's purged the worst negative alleles from the population, there is still a purging process going on, whereby the least fit members don't survive and don't pass their genes on. Now, the issue becomes when you have so few members that you don't want to lose any because there's so few genes that could exist in the potential population that you don't want to lose any of them. Kakapo are still in that stage. The loss of the female Ra, for instance, was a huge blow. She's one of the, same with Gemma, both are the product of artificial insemination, and both of them represent rare Kakapo bloodlines that are not really found in many other birds. So it was a huge loss. Thankfully, both of them have produced chicks in the past, so there is a degree of their genetic potential still found in the population, but less than we would like. But, between 1981 and 1996, I believe about 22, 23, 24 Kakapo chicks were born. 3 of them lived. That was in an era when there was very little human intervention. And it is, when you have a 90% death rate amongst your chicks naturally, and it's probably a little bit high, you'd probably expect something closer to 70%. What we see today with human intervention and with pest-free offshore islands is a remarkable turnaround from that. If we took the average of all Kakapo breeding seasons and said that maybe 25 to 30% of chicks that are born do not survive their first 10 years of life, and then we compare that to the wild where that number might be as high as 70%, it is sad, but it is not the end. Not at this stage anyway. We still are getting 40% of birds who would not be found in the population who are. And I think that's remarkable. I think it's a remarkable testament to the work of the Kakapo recovery team. It's cause for hope for the future of the species. And while it's sad that we do lose so many young Kakapo, it is not unexpected. and naturally in the wild, the same birds would be dying plus many more. So I hope that gives you an insight into the context for the losses of these young birds and some of the causes behind it. And hopefully in this breeding season, we won't see any more losses. Thank you.